2030.
Saudi Arabia, the point of investment fund,
It's a
there's a
big
lot of
vision.
excitement
This
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
The 2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla. This is the 2030, the new bi-weekly podcast on Saudi Arabia, taking a front row seat to the wild transformations underway in the kingdom. Dr. Hanaa, how are you? Nice to see you.
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you.
Back from Al Khobar.
Back in London.
Hey, Falik, how was the trip? Was it good?
Alhamdulillah. The trip was great. Last 10 days of Ramadan, so lots of family time, which was really nice. And Eid, which is a wonderful time to celebrate with family. So it was very good. And obviously the best part of Eid is when you go around and say hi to people and get cash when you're a kid. So my kids have been counting their cash. They're not very good at it, so they're improving. I mean, they're old enough to know how to count cash, but they kept having to recount it. Anyway, wonderful time.
What is the cash thing? I saw that on like social media, and like my friends were like, cash, and I'm like, what do you mean cash? Like, what? So what's the what is this cash tradition? And is there a way for me, a Hawaja, to get in on it? Okay, all right. So
you
what's
missed
the deal
the
with
boat.
It? I missed it. Okay.
So it's for kids. So basically, it's called a idea. There's different ways of saying it, but in Arabic, it's idea. Some people will give gifts, but really, you go wear new clothes on Eid, and you go say hello to your family members, older family members at work. Normally, will give you your idea. And this year, to be honest, the denominations were smaller than they had been in the past. So it's like, instead of getting like hundreds, they were getting 50s, 10s even, which is like not very nice when you're trying to like really collect big sums of money. And so, you take your wallet with you wherever you go. And then there's always this competition of who got more. So you get together with your cousins and you compare notes, who gives the best ideas, who do you need to go say hi to, and you have to like practice saying Eid Mubarak or Kul Aam wa Antum Bkhair and know what the responses are, so people like give you your idea. But yeah, I mean, you do, like I said, you do sometimes have people that give like no idea, and then like they have a reputation in the family.
So like kind of like in Halloween in the US, when like there's a couple houses on your street that give away the big candy bars, and you're like, we need to maybe hit them.
Yeah.
You probably can't do it twice for cash, but where does this cash thing like come from? Like, is it obviously you were doing it as a young kid? Like what is the tradition? Yeah.
It's basically Eid is about celebrating and making kids happy more than anything else. It really is a holiday for children more than anything. And so obviously families get together and you have a big meal and whatever, but it's just, I don't know where cash came from. Not all cultures do cash. I remember at some point we did this comparison of kind of different cultures and what they do. A lot of sweets, a lot of candy, a lot of freshly baked goods are also prepared. But the cash is, I don't know exactly where it started, but you do need to give a gift. And so nothing's better than cash, really.
No, cash is king, man. So so are you handing out cash? Like, do you have your like big sack of cash and you're handing? Okay.
Yeah, there's a big rush to the bank where you go and you get all of the bills that you need to make sure that you can give, all the kids in the family however much you want to distribute. And sometimes you run out, right? Last year, it was really funny because we'd come back to my parents' house after having lunch at my uncle's, and just neighborhood kids came and knocked on our door and were like, "Atona idea." They actually they came in to the house. I was sitting with my dad and these two little girls just popped their head in and were like, "Andakum idea?" And I was like, where did you guys come from? I have never seen you before in my life. It was so cute. So, I mean, they came in, they found our house, they opened the gate, they came into the front door. I gave them the idea. But then they brought all their friends. And I was like, I'm out of ideas. You guys need to leave. But it was really cute, actually, because I'm like, it's kind of a luck game. Sometimes my older son will happen to say hello to a family member they didn't think was going to give an idea. and he'll get more cash than the younger one. And there's this jealousy, but it's all about luck. You might get an extra bill by mistake. You don't give that back. Especially when they're new, right? They stick together sometimes.
These are obviously reals. It's so funny because I feel like Saudi is increasingly going cashless. Like I had a few places that didn't want to take cash. Or like, do you have a card that we can, whatever? And I feel like this is like a big moment for cash in Saudi. So like, do you?
Yes.
Okay. So like, what are kids spending it on? Like, what do they just like
burning
candy and stuff or like
a
whatever?
hole in my son's pocket? He's like, can we go to Jarir? I think I want to buy an Xbox to leave here for when we come back. I'm like, we're not doing that. Save your money.
So it's that much cash. Okay, cool. Wow.
It can be. So when I was a kid, my mom used to make me save it up and then buy gold with it because she thought that was a good investment. And then like I have like these little earrings and stuff from when I was a kid from that. And then I would just take it and spend it in the summer on like stupid Toys R Us things. So kids are buying whatever they want. And it's like when it's Saidiyya, you feel like it's your money. Nobody can tell you what to do with it. So yeah, my mom used to do that, but we also would then skim a bunch of it off the top and not buy candy. We would buy toys usually.
That is amazing. I feel like 15 years in and out of Saudi and I didn't know anything about this cash thing. And then this year it's just like cash. And I'm like, what is everybody talking about? Like, what is this?
Ideas, the best time of the year for children. And then the second you get a job, they don't give you ideas anymore.
So what's the age
very,
limit
very
then?
sad.
Is it like 12 or like, what do you mean by like get a job? Okay.
No, it's more like, 15, like 17, 18, depending. And then you still usually get it, but like close family members, your parents might give you an idea, but then you wouldn't necessarily get it from other people because you're older, you're in college now, or you're working, whatever. Well, the second you get a proper job, like in your 20s, that's it. Like people almost expect you to start giving out ideas, but I mean, yeah.
But you kind of dodged that question earlier, but like you have a proper job now and you have a proper podcast now. Are you giving out cash or are you still being
I wasn't giving out.
I
wasn't. I gave cash only to my closest family members. So my
after such a golden childhood, you can't keep it going.
Nieces and nephews. I will, inshallah, when I'm ready. But it's like, it's more of a household thing. So like my husband gives the ideas.
Okay, so he represents the household.
Totally.
Okay, so he's got it covered. Okay, well, you should take some credit.
There
for that,
are there are households where it's both parents with that, or both what people will give. It depends.
And those are the houses you want to go to as a kid.
Those are the ones when exactly when the somebody pulls the envelope out of their handbag and it's like really thick and full of bills. You're like, go up and say hi again.
Well, when we IPO the 2030, then I'm going to expect you to be like well known as like a deep pocketed.
I'm going to be the 500. I'm going to be the 500 lady. I'll give out the 500.
500 lady. Yeah. Tipping is not really a big thing in Saudi. And my friends have been really like on top of me, like very on top of me about tipping because they don't want the American tipping culture to creep in. And I completely get that. And it's kind of getting out of control here with like you buy a cup of coffee at like the airport and they're like, what percentage tip do you want to give? And you're like, 0. You like poured a cup of coffee. That's it. It's not like a surcharge, but they're worried about just kind of everything being tipping. And I love to tip. Like it's my favorite thing to do. And like I keep cash for tipping. So when I was there, I would like get Saudi cash and then I would try to tip and my friends would be like, don't do the cash. They're like, if you want to give a tip, give them something at Ramadan. And I was like, oh, well, that's like 2 months away. I'm not going to show up later and be like, hey, I got a bunch of cash. Here you go. Remember me? I'm the guy that bought the coffee or whatever, It's like.
We definitely need to do a deep dive on like the giving culture in Saudi because it is very, very vibrant, but it's different from the tipping when you buy a cup of coffee, right? So yeah, for sure. Saving it for Ramadan because then basically is not a bad strategy because then those people really do depend on you and think about you annually as the person that's going to help. But so I used to work in a restaurant when I was in university. So tipping for me was really in the US. Tipping was really important, and I tried to get like the culture kind of up and running, and everybody was so sick of my contributions to what you should tip and what was reasonable and what wasn't. And like sometimes I'd add like money to like my friends, like when we would all tip, and it was not what it wasn't 20%. It's supplement. Anyway, I don't know. It's still alive and well in me, the whole desire to make sure that people are rewarded for their work through tipping because of those years of working, serving pizza.
Yeah, it's funny. I also worked in a restaurant in college, and I consider it one of the best like professional experiences I've ever had
100%.
because it kind of teaches you about. It was a really small like French bistro in Charlottesville, Virginia. So it was like I was often the only guy in there, so I was the bartender or the server, or like kind of did everything, which I really liked. But it was like a good like professional experience, developmental thing. But yeah, ever since then, I'm very keen on tipping because I know how being on the receiving end of it, you're like, oh yeah. This episode, we're going to do a deep dive on AI, which is something that we talked about offline, kind of texting about it. There was this report that we're going to get to in a second from the New York Times, but we sort of hit it back and forth between us and kind of realized there was enough here to go deeper on. This is a story that's a few weeks old now, but it does have a ton of angles, many hidden caverns in this story. So this is the exclusive report that was released a few weeks ago, made big waves after it was reported. Big waves, by the way, keeping the water theme of Deep Dive going. Saudi Arabia is creating a gigantic fund to invest in AI tech. And by gigantic, we mean $40 billion, reportedly, which would make Saudi Arabia potentially the largest single sovereign investor in the market. And I'm going to come back to that point and parse that in a second. Let's get to the story. In recent weeks, the New York Times reported representatives of Saudi Arabia's public investment fund have discussed a potential partnership with Andreessen Horowitz, one of Silicon Valley's top venture capital firms, and other financiers. The report cited 3 people briefed on the plans, and they cautioned that the plans could still change, by the way. So this isn't set in stone.
Right.
You see it on LinkedIn, people saying this is happening. It's not really a done deal yet. The reason this is deserving of a deep dive, I think, this week is because AI is kind of semper ubique these days, changing the way we work and live, and potentially a lot more beyond that. We're still doing this podcast kind of the old school way, although there's some new equipment and recording software here, but we are not AI bots. We are real people. Trust us. So back to the piece, quote, officials from the Saudi fund have discussed the role Andreessen Horowitz, already an active investor in AI, and whose co-founder, Ben Horowitz, is friends with the fund's governor, Yasser Al-Rumayyan, could play and how such a fund would work, the people said. The $40 billion target would dwarf the typical amounts raised by U.S. VC firms and would be eclipsed only by SoftBank, the Japanese conglomerate that has long been the world's largest investor in startups. Now, this is the point that I want to get to and then end on and then come back up to the surface here and discuss with you, Hanaa. The report continues, quote, the Saudi tech fund, which is being put together with the help of Wall Street banks, actually, end quote right there. That actually means, I missed this. That means that this is a little bit more advanced than in talks. They're bringing the banks in. Okay, requote. Will be the latest potential entrant into a field already awash in cash. Yeah, the global frenzy around AI has pushed up valuations of private and public companies like NVIDIA, which is insane. That is an insane stock. And OpenAI, obviously, is sort of the famous AI one, but you also have Anthropic, which raised $7 billion last year in 1 year alone. I think it was last year or this year, but that's a lot. I mean, even for deep tech, which is sort of my professional focus, that's a lot of money. I mean, deep tech has long R&D cycles, really a ton of time put into them, but also they're capital intensive to get deep tech off the ground. And AI is it's the deep tech. So it takes a lot to get it going, obviously, and here we are. So let's talk about this. Let's do the deep dive. I mean, this is kind of an insane story.
It is. It's a lot of money. It's a huge fund, right? And I wonder, I guess the question is kind of what's going to come out of the investment, right? Where is the influence going to be? If you want to be a leader in AI, is it because you're putting in more money, or is it something along the lines of, for instance, investing in the tech itself? Or is it just because it's like the next thing that we feel like we have to do it, because if we don't, we're going to miss the boat somehow. Is there another way that we could be big players in developing AI somehow, or in kind of the direction it's going in, right? Because it's kind of really trendy, but it's also really scary on many levels, and it's also, you know, a huge opportunity. So I guess the question really is like, kind of, what can Saudi really do in this space? And is this investment kind of going to put them on the map as key players in the direction it's going to go in? What do you think?
It's interesting because, like, first of all, that is a lot of money, and I mean that's an enormous amount of money. And what's interesting about it is it's all in one. It's all in one investor, and that was the point kind of made in the article. It's like one fund is controlling that much money. There's a ton of money in AI right now. It's the hottest investment from a VC standpoint. It's also very, I would say, later on for Saudi Arabia to be kind of entering this from a, hey, we want to be the leader in this space. Maybe they're not going to go for the leader mantle. And I think what you said is interesting. It's like maybe they're going for a different angle here. Maybe they're going for literally just stakes in some of these future companies so that there may be some tech transfer, or maybe it's an equity play. We don't really even know that. But there's an article that came out also in the New York Times, which has kind of been on fire on the AI beat recently. But I read it in the middle of the night last night, woke up in the middle of the night, and it was the first thing that I saw. I was like, I'm going to read this. But it was all about a French startup called Mistral. I think it means wave or wind in French. But it's now starting to be considered a challenger to OpenAI and Google. And it's a French startup. It's from a guy that is basically spinning off from Meta and from Google and starting up basically an OpenAI in France. And his angle is, we don't want Silicon Valley and broadly the United States to be controlling what is ethical and what is not in AI, which matters for the world. They're getting some traction. You have China that's already in the space.
Exactly.
And then you have a ton of other players trying to get in. So how can Saudi Arabia fit in and also like make this align with Vision 2030? So like what, manufacturing chips or batteries, or I mean, energy storage and energy usage is going to be massive for AI. It rips energy. So, I mean, until something changes, like, yeah, I think this is interesting. And I think that to just say, oh, we're going to be a new AI leader, like some people have kind of misinterpreted on LinkedIn and other places, it's not really telling the whole story. I don't think Saudi is going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's all of the support network that you need around that. And then there's all of the different layers to AI, right? So it's not, I like the idea that, you know, this French company is like, we don't want the US to dictate exactly, you know, what's happening in this space. And you've seen that happen. You know, the UAE have their own generative AI company as well. And you know, and that works better in Arabic, and the technology is really growing very quickly and moving very quickly. So things that weren't even fathomable in terms of, I don't know, just kind of generating images and videos a year ago has improved significantly. So there's the actual tech, there's how fast it's developing, and then there's all that support network, and then who's in control. And all of these questions are really big. And I think that they are uncomfortable to talk about. So it's another big player in the space, and I don't know which direction it's going to go in and how it's going to be, you know, steering the various kind of arms of its development into the future. I don't know. AI makes me very uncomfortable, as it does, I think, a lot of people. So big sums of money put towards it makes me a little bit uncomfortable as well, because I don't know what's going to happen. Like, does that mean that people are going to replace humans a lot faster using the AI? Does it mean that we're going to have to be really worried about kind of the rivalry between key players? I don't know.
It's interesting because it's like a lot of times when at least I think about AI, I only think about the challenges and like the potential downsides of it. I don't like, I mean, I know there are upsides. To me, I only focus on that. I only focus on like, well, what if you put AI into a weaponized drone?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, but then I think about that. I'm like, well, that's terrifying. What are we doing making AI? Why are we
scary.
giving $13 billion to OpenAI when their source code is not opened? I just, to me, I'm just sort of like, I'm uncomfortable with where this is going, and yet also feel completely powerless. So it's like Saudi Arabia announces $40 billion are going to invest in it. I'm like, okay, but like, what is it? I mean, I get AI, but I'm just kind of like, I don't see where this is going, unlike other technologies before it, like Web3 and crypto and all that stuff. I understood to an extent. It's like totally leveling the playing field of financing and all that stuff. It's just, this seems like, well, this could be, this could blow the planet up. I mean, I actually don't even know. So it's like, yeah, I think everybody's kind of like, yeah. So,
but I also think that we have, like you just said, right? I think of all of the challenges and the negatives, but I think we do have to look at the investment as a potential very positive step forward of looking at all of the potential that can come out of investing in AI and maybe contributing to the positive aspects of it, right? It makes things more efficient. It is eliminating a lot of the busy work that people don't like to do, and people can then focus on the more innovative, creative side of work that we do need to engage in if we really want to drive the world forward in a positive way. I think that it's also, just there are so many opportunities to manipulate it in ways by making sure that people are engaging with it in the right ways. So it is generating things that are a reflection of kind of positive sentiments in society, not only negative ones. And there's potential to do amazing things, right? So we don't want to be these Luddite people rejecting technology and only thinking of the negatives, because if you do that, you miss the wave. And I think that's what I read into this, right? Like, Saudi does not want to miss the wave and can't afford to, because it is going to rule the way we do everything in the future.
This is the main stage.
The main stage.
The main
The main stage.
This is the main stage.
Could we get Lucien and Hanaa to the main stage, please?
So excited to introduce Ghada AlMuhanna, a Saudi media and visual anthropologist and cultural and media advisor based out of Berlin. She focuses on the visual history of the Arabian Peninsula, and her work emphasizes the importance of storytelling, cultural preservation, and cultural exchange. Her passion for the region's identity drives her to use Twitter and Instagram and social media platforms to retell the stories of the Arabian Peninsula, reclaiming its narrative and challenging misconceptions. Super excited also to mention that Ghada is going to be a regular on the show in a segment titled 1727, where we really do kind of go into the history of the kingdom through visual tools. Welcome, Ghada.
Thanks for having me. Quite excited.
Let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and the very, very cool work that you do.
I'll start with the basics. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Riyadh. After graduating high school, I decided to go into law, wanted to have a political career, and then did my master's in Michigan. Was like, this is the worst mistake I've ever made, ever. Why did I ever think I could be a lawyer? Went into politics and enjoyed it so much that I decided I want to be a researcher. And then that's when the revelation started, because I used to work as a counterterrorism researcher, and I was working specifically in women's, like, why do women join terrorist groups, studying how women kind of influence groups, how could they infiltrate them, and how they can actually be like the better terrorists, to say the least. Like, it's horrible to say it this way, but like, just that's what I was studying. So from there, I started noticing in, let's say, background conversations, and when I would talk to other think tankers, I noticed that they would be like surprised by the conclusions we would find in our studies. And there were certain stereotypes that certain researchers had about the region that made me go, okay, wait a second, this is really weird. Why would you think this way? And with time, I started realizing, oh, okay, this has to do with the lack of content that they have. There's a lot of, let's say, written content, but not much visual content. And so just for my own sake, I started to go into the archives and look for the content and still slowly start to pull it out. Obviously, this collided with the whole I'm very homesick. So so I started pulling the photos, sometimes cry, sometimes look at them with like, oh, this is so interesting kind of vibes. And then I would share them online. And then over time, people started paying attention to the content. And I started noticing or started feeling, okay, I do have some sort of responsibility towards pushing out more and more content, explaining things. So yeah, that's how I ended up going through archives, searching through archives.
I mean, you focus on the representation of the Arabian Peninsula's culture and heritage mostly. So can you explain kind of what that means to you a little bit more and the inspiration behind that?
So I believe that the Arabian Peninsula hasn't had its fair share of being truly studied and represented appropriately in the media. Anytime you try to look for a story from the Arabian Peninsula, it's either written by a Westerner, an Easterner, or by someone in the Arab world that's not from the peninsula. So it's always someone else that tells the story. It's never the people of the peninsula as such. So personally, as someone who comes from there, I feel very motivated to tell the story, to talk about, okay, that's a perspective that you have, but we have a different perspective, and this is where it is.
So when you think about images that come to people's minds when they think about the Arabian Peninsula or Saudi Arabia in specific, what are those images?
Lawrence of Arabia is like the quickest answer. I mean, when you talk, I mean, it's very different when you talk to different groups of people around the world. So if you talk to Westerners, the first images that come to their mind is Lawrence of Arabia. Like when you talk to a lot of, let's say, older Westerners, and by older I mean like 50s and above, they would tell you like, yeah, I love Lawrence of Arabia. It was one of my favorite movies, which I mean, I don't blame them for that, but that's the image that they have in their minds. If you talk to someone a bit younger, they have certain conflicts in their mind. So they only see conflicts. People remember images of like, oh, the oil embargo, especially let's say if you talk to Americans, they remember those images. And so that's the connection that they have. If you ask people in my generation, I'm a millennial, they think of 9/11, you know? So it's a lot of, it's different when you ask every other generation, what do they think of the region or what do they think of Saudi? You notice that visually they only think about the things that they've been given. So when you do look at the general media sphere that talks about the Arabian Peninsula, 80 to 90% of the time, it's just negative imagery. Even when, let's say, the editors or the producers have thought, this doesn't look bad, and then they show it on TV, it's actually a really negative depiction of that community, society, culture, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, somebody else was telling me that they think of Aladdin. And I think that's
Aladdin true.
Aladdin
is very conspicuous. He's not, you don't know if he's Southern Asian
Exactly.
or if he's Middle Eastern. So it's like a blend of two cultures.
So many different cultures.
It's too weird.
But yeah, there is that, you know, the belly dancer. There is that image as well, right? So we have the conflict, as you mentioned, and then we also have kind of, you know, whatever media was really big, like Lawrence of Arabia or maybe Aladdin even.
Yeah, but it's also, sorry to interrupt, but it's also really important to note that, like, for example, it's even different when you look in the Middle East. So yes, for example, if you ask someone from China, what do you think of Saudis or Arabians? They think, oh, belly dancers. Right. But if you ask an Egyptian, what do you think of Arabians or Lebanese or whatever nationality, they would say, or Saudis, or like, what do they think of the peninsula people? not all of them, but there are some that say, oh yeah, like Bedouins that just traverse the desert. So everyone has a very different experience to the visual of the Arabian Peninsula. And we don't even have an experience with our own visuals. So it's a very interesting thing to deal with. Yeah.
Tell me what you mean by that we don't have an experience with our own visuals.
I mean, consider this. The first TV in Saudi was in 1960, like TV station was in 1969. And it was probably the first to broadcast in the entire region. From what I know, Oman was probably the last in the 70s. So that's a pretty late development to enter into, let's say, the field of producing your own images and trying to kind of alter a little bit the stereotypical, let's say, perceptions people have of you. But also, let's not forget, if the station started in 1969, they only had about 10 years to correct an image until this other image came through with let's say the siege of Mecca, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, all these things that changed the tide of the region and changed the perspective of the regions, and especially within the case of the Arabian Peninsula, becoming more conservative, becoming more restrictive, and wishing to kind of not create images in the name of God. And so slowly not producing your own images, which then leaves the door open for people to come in and kind of describe who you are to yourself, where at some point you do have younger generations who start believing in these narratives and saying like, yeah, I am that regressive Bedouin that had nothing to do, that had no homes in the desert.
Right. No history.
No history. Yeah.
Yeah. You hear that a lot. And younger generations, if they're not inquisitive, really do fall into that trap. I've heard it a lot. I hear it with my own children sometimes when I say, what do you think of when you think Saudi? And they'll say hot. And I'm like, really, guys? We've had this conversation before. But so tell me about the process, the archival process and the research that you do, because I think it's fascinating. You're finding images that many of us have never seen before.
I really don't think that's true. I think everyone has seen these photographs, or at least some of the photographs before. The only difference is we're seeing it now from a different perspective. So what we are used to is someone showing us a picture and saying, this is the picture, accept it as it is and move on. So I'll give you like a quick example. I would tell you like, oh, Hanaa, this is one of the older houses in Taif. Okay. And then I would say, accept it, don't inquisite, and then move on. This is what we've seen for many years. What we haven't seen is someone holding up the picture and saying, why are the windows green? What possessed them to design things this way? What made the photographer take this picture? How and why? So asking these questions is the new thing that's going on at the moment, and I do think it's because of the cultural revolution we're having at the moment in the kingdom, where people are becoming quite inquisitive about the culture, about where's your position, what's your identity in this world, where do you place yourself, and I think we're at a point also that we're just done being told who we are. And therefore, it's kind of like the whole nation is in a search. I think we just need to look at the raw content and really expose ourselves to, let's say, our history. And that's when our questions start. Like, okay, how do we as a society that has no archive, that has actually consistently for 30 years eliminated any form of cultural expression, or like, it wasn't that it was not allowed, but it was like society just like dampen the mood.
I like the way you put that.
No, because that's the truth. The people think, oh, you were banned from expressing yourself. And it was like, no. There was nothing legal about it. Like it was totally legal to do whatever you wanted, but the society just hindered you. And you are part of a fabric, and you cannot cut yourself off of this thing. So might as well just either push a little bit against the social fabric or work with what you have. I think that's what everyone understood at the time. So imagine being consistently and I witnessed this myself, where you had families that burned photographs or burned film or burned whatever,
or ripped them up, right? My aunt did that. She did a lot of ripping of the photos,
so it's
right?
And it's very painful, but and a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's to save the souls. So the intention is there. There's a positive intention, but there is no understanding that you are eliminating memory. And how could society continue when it doesn't even have a memory of itself for time? When I, for example, look at my own parents, I think to myself, they're more, let's say, solid in their identity than I am. For me personally, I mean, now it is, don't get me wrong, but when I was a teenager, it was a consistent desire to try to understand, where am I in this world? A bit too, let's say, globalized. English is constantly in my life. Other, let's say, forms of cultural expressions are in my life. I would watch American TV and movies and stuff, but that's not really who I am. And then I look at and I hear speeches or poetry or whatever, and I also think, but that's not also really who I am. So where am I in this mix? I look at films from Egypt and I laugh, and there is a connection in language, but not in expression. It's not the same body language. It's not the same clothes. It's not the same just way of speech patterns, you start kind of really wanting this for yourself and missing it.
So with the Vision 2030, and our kind of mission to find expression, define culture, define who we are as Saudis, and to express that to the rest of the world, where do photos come into the play? Where do images come into the play, in the mix there?
I mean, when you have a renaissance, lots of visuals come out. So that's about it, if I'm a fashion designer and I want to design a full line and sell it in the let's say, global market, I want it to be very authentic. I need to go back to the archives. If I am an architect, I want to do what Zaha Hadid did and push it further. How can I do that? I have to go back to the archives. It's not enough to just look at written content. I think whenever it comes to the cultural industry, you have to really consider the fact that they heavily depend on visuals. And since we as a country, I mean, now there's a lot changing, and I'm very happy and very proud of all these changes. But at the moment, there is no cultural archive yet. They are starting to, I mean, a few years ago, the Ministry of Culture announced the Cultural Archive, which is an amazing thing. But they're obviously still working on it, and there's and you understand, archives don't just pop up in a day and then it's like, okay, I'm here. So it's obviously going to take 5-10 years for it to really build itself and sustain itself and kind of function normally. But if you really want to push this industry further, then you have to offer the creatives the chance to actually look and view the history So I've had, for example, multiple people in the creative industry reach out to me for content, for the archives, for visuals. Sometimes it's not necessarily just visuals. Sometimes it's like, oh, I know. So I found this book in King Saud University with this title, blah, 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 blah. And the author mentioned a photograph. Can you find the photo? So
Can you?
Would be not always. But yeah, and sometimes it becomes very intimate. I mean, there are many requests that I get sometimes in the DMs where people ask me to find photos of their grandparents. And that always warms my heart because it's like I would love to. And not all the time, but there are times where we did find people's relatives. But yeah, sometimes so it can really range from something so intimate to something very public. So going back to the whole Vision 2030 question, I mean, you are creating, let's say, a new economy. And for you to do that, there are many things that you have to let go of. And there are many things that you have to start adopting in terms of going back through the history and checking things out. I mean, I'm so happy, by the way, every founding day or foundation day when people, and I notice that, okay, this is a bit TMI, but like I notice that it's like a month before my account starts being very active.
Oh, I love it.
Not like me posting pictures, but like I start seeing people liking photos or like bookmarking the photos. And I'm like, oh, I'm so curious. What are you going to do with that photo? Or how are
Putting
you going to
costumes together?
What are you doing? And so sometimes I'm very happy, you know. It is a form of linking ourselves to the past. So it's not like what everyone thinks, and that's what frustrates me when I talk to people about 2030. They think, oh, so it's like a new me, new you kind of situation. It's like, no.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. I call it, it's a reclamation, a vision of reclamation, reclaiming the narrative, the story, everything. It's just time.
And we just did a segment on Founding Day, actually, and talked specifically about that. It's like, you know, some of the things are not very old, right? We do talk about the first Saudi state in 1727, but people are bringing up cassette tapes and stereos and things that are just their past, right? And so it is. Yeah. It's like, what is my personal past, my personal history, my grandparents, and what does that mean to me? And I do think that it is so much reclaiming your own history and contextualizing it within the broader history of the country. And I think that that's a really important thing to recognize. And
yeah, absolutely. We really have never been given a chance for ourselves to actually sit down and look at the history. There was a German traveler in the 1800s that went to Saudi, and he just happened to meet my own great-grandfather somehow, and he painted him, which is the greatest thing I ever have. You know, it's like a nice memory of me having like a visual of my grandpa. I've seen this before years ago, but in low quality, and every time it gets shared in like the family groups, it's kind of like captioned with, oh, he's great. Oh, he's that. Oh, he's that. And he is, you know, it's my grandpa. No debate about that. But then in the German notes, it just made me really laugh because it is perspective at the end, you know, where the guy just wrote, he was kind of cheap.
I love that.
Like there was an incident and they were fighting about it, and it was kind of like, calm down.
That's awesome.
So when I saw that, to me, I was kind of like, yeah, that humanizes my experience, because that shows to me that my grandpa isn't this kind of unattainable person that I can't like connect to, you know, like he is a human at the end. And I think that's our issue in a lot of the ways we deal with our photographs. So to kind of make them unattainable as a human experience, to say, oh, this is solidified in time and you can't just comment about it or say anything about it.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I'm really excited to bring that human side of Saudi to the audience that's listening through our discussions. It was such an interesting discussion that we've just had, and I really appreciate your insights and cannot wait to have more discussions and references to some of these really interesting stories, and just to kind of understand our culture and our history and our human side through some of this. I'm really looking forward to more of this. So, Ghada, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's get to the news. This is interesting, actually, and let's talk about this. I'm not as qualified as you are to discuss this matter, so it's good that I'm reading this news item. The UN Commission on the Status of Women unanimously decided to choose Saudi Arabia to chair the 69th session of the Commission during the year 2025. The Commission is on the status of women. Ambassador Dr. Abdulaziz Al Wasl would be the first ever permanent representative of Saudi Arabia to chair this committee since its establishment in 1946.
So I have a lot of thoughts. My first reaction to this so just a little bit of background. Al Wasl took up his post as ambassador and permanent representative of Saudi Arabia to the UN in July 2022, after serving as ambassador and permanent representative to the UN at Geneva since November 2016. So he's been Saudi's representative in the UN for some time. The Commission on the Status of Women first met at Lake Success, New York, in February 1947, soon after the founding of the United Nations. So this is, again, it's an old commission. The United Nations have been talking about the status of women for many years. I think the reason that this is a really important topic to talk about is because there's been so much speculation about the corruption in the UN and how could they possibly give this to Saudi Arabia, the country that is so oppressive to women, et cetera, which is kind of an old soundbite now, to be completely honest. Every time I hear people really attacking Saudi for where women are quoting very old stats, and they're also looking at a historical version of Saudi that has progressed so much in a short amount of time, which means people maybe not able to follow as closely as, we follow it, knowing more about the country and living through it. But I also think that the reason it's important to acknowledge this as a positive step is to give credit where credit's due. I mean, there have been several reports on how Saudi has moved the furthest away from where it was in the past and progressed the most compared to other countries because they've put in so much effort to improve the status of women within the kingdom. And that's not just elite women, that is across the board. It's looking at social welfare policies. It's looking at the women's ability to access their own kind of legal support, legal representation. It's family law, family status law. It is work, and it is training and education, and so many other things. And giving the United Nations giving Saudi Arabia the opportunity to kind of chair this session, I think is actually encouraging them to keep going and encouraging other countries that need to make progress to follow suit. If you put in effort, you then can be a voice at the table where you need all the countries that need to improve women's status. They need to be there together. And just the last point on this, I know we've gone on for a little bit, but this is clearly a topic that's very close to my heart. My last point on this is that I think the reason it is important is because you have challenges globally, and you might attack one country that you think looks very clearly negative from the outside, but we have gender pay gaps globally. We have issues with women not being able to access certain healthcare in all countries of the world, including the United States. There are issues with women around the world that we need to address. So we should not be throwing stones if we live in glass houses, is my final note on that. And that's it.
Those were all great points, but I think it's time now for me, an American man, an American male, to comment on this matter. That is excellent. I want to echo kind of a sentiment that you made earlier. And I think it speaks to a broader like theory or idea that we're doing with this podcast, which is Saudi Arabia is changing very quickly. We should be encouraging that change as it is change in a direction that the West wants to see in pretty much every way. Diversification away from oil, like advancement of women, diversifying economy, like opening up culture and creating a place to visit. I mean, there's so much good happening out of Saudi Arabia right now. So for the media and for those in the West who have an antiquated version or an Orientalist version about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, it's like, wouldn't you like to see these positive changes happening? And if you do want to see them happening, like, why don't you encourage them? Why don't you give Saudi Arabia a chance? Like, this is a huge opportunity. And, you know, I mean, the United States, women did not vote at the very beginning, and only until 120 years ago, something like that, women got the right to vote. That's less than half of our total history. Women were not allowed to vote. So for us to stand on our of soapbox and say, like, come on, yeah, like I'm all for this. I think this is really cool.
You had countries in Europe where women weren't allowed to vote until the 70s. So, I mean, honestly, I think it's really frustrating that people are constantly attacking Saudi for the status of women. I think there are other things that we should be focusing on, especially now since there's been so much progress. But I will pivot now and talk a little bit about something completely different, moving to Aramco and looking at Saudi Aramco's appetite to invest and partner with China. So there's been news on Saudi Aramco's appetite to do this. Speaking at a development forum held in Beijing, Amin and Nasser expressed the aim to become a partner in the Asian giant's economic journey. And Nasser highlighted strong opportunities for cooperation between Saudi Aramco and Chinese partners in sectors aimed at reducing emissions.
Yeah, the Saudi-China kind of warm-up that's been happening is concerning to me a little bit as a full American. It's like I'm getting a little jealous of China, I guess you could say. You know, they're brokering this Iran deal. They're coming to Saudi. They're talking about new visa statuses. But this is interesting because Aramco is still very much huge, and pretty much the way that they're diversifying their investments as a company kind of always will be, because they're doing a lot of stuff in venture. They're branching out from oil, but Al Nasser said, so quote, "So I believe both our strategic goals in chemicals are well aligned, and we are already seeing Aramco's action on the ground. There were 2 agreements last year for multi-billion-dollar liquids to chemicals investments in China." And he added, "One is our acquisition of an interest in Rongsheng Petrochemicals Company," I bet that's a good logo, "and Zhejiang province for $3.4 billion. The other is our partnership in Liaoning province." I love reading these at a cost of approximately $12 billion. $12 billion, it's a lot. Anyway, there's a lot. Saudi China is now a thing, and I'm just going to have to live with my jealousy.
Yeah, I mean, there's this discussion about the pivot to China, right? And are we pivoting? And I think it's really important to note that the historical relationship between Saudi and the United States is probably going to remain strong. And, you know, Saudi has definitely come out and expressed this multiple times. I think the world is, you know, an interesting sea of opportunities. And therefore, I believe that Saudi is looking for opportunities where it makes sense. But I don't think that, you know, they're going to forget their old friends.
Inshallah, I hope not. I think it's more like they're just kind of, instead of having a one-way bilateral, like strong relationship, they're just a little more open, you know, to. And
I think that's healthy
when
it comes to countries.
Yeah, totally. Just a little jealous. That's okay. Tennis, anyone. I can't believe this is an amazing story. Riyadh will host the next 3 editions of the World Tennis Association finals from 2024 to 2026, following the announcement Thursday of a new agreement between the WTA and the Saudi Tennis Federation. This has been in the works for months. The 2024 season-ending finals will take place between November 2nd and 9th, featuring the top 8 singles players and doubles teams in the race to the WTA finals.
Exciting. So, I mean, tennis is, there was some controversy not so long ago, early this year, actually, when, the ambassador to the United States, Princess Rima bint Bender, said she was deeply hurt by an article that was published in the Washington Post in which the former tennis stars, Evert and what's the last name? The other one, Navratilova.
Martina. Yeah.
So, yes, they criticized the Women's Tennis Association for wanting to hold WTA finals in Saudi. And again, it went back to that question of women's rights, women's kind of participation in societies and in sports. I don't think that Saudi necessarily needs to host every final. It's exciting when we do, but I do think that we shouldn't be unfairly attacked for things when things have been progressing. But yeah, I think, basically they selected Riyadh in the end anyway. And there was a quote: following a comprehensive evaluation process over several months, which has included assessment of multiple bids from different regions and engagement with players, all prospective hosts were considered against a clear set of criteria. So Riyadh won fair and square according to them. But it'll be exciting to host it in Saudi, I think.
Speaking of winning fair and square, do you know who won the University of Virginia intramural tennis championship in 2007? You're talking to him, baby.
Really?
Any chance I get to mention that? Yes. It wasn't
well
my
done.
main sport. Thank you so much.
Do you have a big trophy?
They gave me a T-shirt, which I still have and can't wear anymore because it's like I want to keep it, so it's like I don't want it falling apart.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just the taste of victory is enough for me, honestly.
You weren't even able to borrow the trophy for a year before they had to give it to the next winner?
Thing is that glory is not something that is tangible. Like, you can have a million trophies, but just knowing that you dominated your opponents.
Okay.
Intrepid launches a women-led tour in Saudi Arabia. This is really, again, this is cool because the way this is setting up is that I'm talking about women and then you're talking a lot more knowledgeably about women. Intrepid Travel has announced a women's-only tour in Saudi Arabia led by women for women. Sounds like discrimination to me. The tour represents.
You sound like a Saudi guy now.
The white male has long been disadvantaged. The tour represents an effort to sidestep the luxury-focused travel industry in the country while giving travelers a more authentic experience and supporting the booming female labor force. Over to you, Hannah.
Well, there's a quote, right? This shift has been one positive effect, which is that it gave more rights to women, said Zina bin Sheikh, the managing director of EMEA for Intrepid Travel. This tour effectively means that we can speak to women and we can meet women who own businesses, women guides, women who run restaurants, etc. So I think, and then just to finally, the 12-day adventure will bring travelers to female-owned establishments. I think the beauty of traveling this way is to focus on the hosts, not just the travelers, says bin Sheikh. I think what's interesting is you can do that without having it have to be a female-led tour for women only. But every time I talk to women that visit Saudi, they always tell me all we do is go to Riyadh and all we do is meet with people that we know from outside the kingdom. So I do think there's this fear of speaking to women. You think that they're untouchable. You're not allowed to go and meet women, business owners or people that you're not allowed to have a chat. So maybe this is a good way to kind of push both sides of the tour to talk to each other and start learning about, kind of common day-to-day experiences that they all have. I don't know. I think it's a good thing. I think that we need to lift this kind of mystery veil and let people just meet other women inside Saudi Arabia.
I just like to be invited to stuff, so
No, I agree, and I do think that everything is better when there is diversity, which is why I think it's really important to get women involved in the economy to begin with. I'm not saying anybody should be replacing anybody else. There is no zero-sum game here. So I'm not 100% on board with exclusive women-only things. But I do think that because of the way the culture is set up, and some women still are incredibly conservative and don't want to interact with other men, this is a way to get those women more involved in tourism. So it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, when I'm in Saudi Arabia, I don't want to hang out with expats because I just am not into that at all. We talked about this probably off the air, but like when I'm there, I don't like people are like, oh, my friend's also in Saudi and he's from London. You guys should hang out. It's like, why? Because we're both not from here. Like I'm not here for that. So it's interesting. I think it's kind of a cool story. This is the type of thing that you're seeing in a society that's increasingly including women more and more. You start to get things like this. That's why I think it's kind of interesting to both of us. It's a little bit of a latest data point that things like this are going down,
I mean, I do have a friend who visited from Australia a couple months ago, and I did introduce her to my cousin, sort of like cousin's wife, who is half Australian, half Saudi. So I did feel like I needed her to meet the other Australian. Maybe I should be more sensitive to your sentiment of like, you don't want to meet all the other Americans. You'd rather meet the Saudis. So
I exclusively hang out. I hung out with one dude from London, but my fraternity brother was like, you got to meet him. He's great. And I was like, I mean, and he was great. We did hang out. We went to my favorite restaurant there, Blue Garden. But a little shout out to Blue Garden, by the way. But and he loved it. But I was just like, usually I'm just like, where are my Saudis at? Because it's I love Saudis anyway.
But you've been to Saudi a lot, right? So this was my friend's first visit to Saudi ever. I'm the only Saudi she's ever known, and I wanted her to feel like there were, I introduced her to lots of other Saudis, but I did feel, and they really actually did hit it off, the two Australian girls. So anyway, Dolce & Gabbana leans into Saudi. So to further its Middle East expansion, Dolce & Gabbana has unveiled its strategy for Saudi Arabia and will open up a new flagship store located at the luxury destination Via Real. D&G will also be entering a formal partnership with Diriyah Company, the Saudi state-owned organization responsible for the restoration, redevelopment, and management of the historic Diriyah area in Riyadh, which I know you're a big fan of.
Huge fan of Diriyah and Dolce, huh? So this is cool because there's a quote that the CEO said. I'm going to get to that in a second. But they were the first, really, they claim. This was a press release. Whenever I read these, I'm like, I usually go really in detail to the way things are phrased because PR people love to throw in those words that are like, well, that's not factual. But they claim to be the first international fashion brand to stage a fashion show in the Gulf region after the pandemic, which they did at the very best place in Saudi Arabia, not the very well. I mean, it's pretty terrific, but it's cool. On brand for them. It's pretty cool. Yeah. This is a quote from the company's CEO, Alfonso Dolce. Great name. Saudi Arabia is a country to which we have always looked with keen interest for its entrepreneurial and economic dynamism. Dynamism. Why is that a hard word to say? Can you say it? Dynamism. Dynamism.
Dynamism.
Jeez.
I think you were putting the emphasis on the wrong
emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. As well as its years, I'm really destroying this, as well as its ancient culture. For years, we have been present in this country, initially approaching the market with caution and respect, deepening our understanding of its history and social aspects. To this day, we can say the Saudi market is very interesting, reacts positively to incentives, and is open to new proposals. I don't know, like if this was a translated thing, but they're just like, it was kind of a refreshing, this is a very honest, interesting quote from this dude. Caution and respect is probably how more people should be approaching this market.
It sounds very Italian to me, honestly. I do think it was translated from Italian. There's a lot of superfluous language, but I think it's exciting. And, Saudis love their brands. So this is good.
Do you like Dolce and Gabbana? What do they do? They like luxury like handbags and stuff and shoes, right?
And
They're
clothes,
just a luxury
and clothes and
Okay.
yeah. More, I would say clothes and bags, definitely. Do I? Yeah. I mean, I'm Saudi. I like all I like all designer brands. I can't help it. It's like and I'm probably like a moderate consumer of luxury brands. Like I don't it's but compared to people here in like where I live in London, I definitely, yeah. I mean, it's more than the average person for sure. So
there was a lot in there. We're gonna need to pull back some layers on that. Okay, but
no,
we will
this
do
is
that.
good. Let's just move along.
No. Hold on a second. Wait 1 second. Can you give me like a very informal ranking of like Dolce, Gucci, like give me a top like few that Saudi, like do Saudis have a unique perspective on like what's cooler? Like I would say, so just as some context, I would say that like Saudis think certain cars are cooler in Saudi Arabia than they might be considered here. Like for example, like Toyota, which I now have like a huge like appreciation for and respect for, and Lexus, because they dominate in Saudi, are not as cool here as Mercedes or whatever. I don't know. But is there like something like that for fashion? Like is Dolce at the top, or is it like I don't know the other brand names.
A couple years ago, there was like there was a really big kind of Dolce like summer collection with really big patterns. Like that was pretty big. So yeah, it can be big, and then you'll see people using it. Is there a ranking? It's cyclical. It's not always the same brands, definitely. I would say at the moment, some of the trendier brands are Loewe, which is a Spanish brand, but actually has like a German name. But anyway, people often mispronounce it. It's spelled Loewe. So that one's pretty big. Celine's big, right? There's also like Louis Vuitton's classic. People always want to carry Louis Vuitton. Chanel is super classic. Everybody wants to wear like Chanel shoes. There's a specific kind of shoe almost everybody wears. I don't know. I'm just going to throw out more brands, but there was, I watched a great Instagram kind of clip of somebody doing a street survey of, can you recognize these brands? And they, somewhere, I think in Europe, I think they were in Italy, maybe in France, and they found two Saudi girls. Like, obviously they got every single one.
It, yeah.
It's unfortunate, but it is definitely something that we're not very bad at.
I think that for our next we got to put a bow in it there and tie up this episode, which is unfortunate because I would love to just go for another full hour grilling you on brands as a Saudi woman, as an expert in the field. But we will put a bow in it there and talk next time. Our next deep dive and all of the news items will be on fashion, so I can actually learn something about this subject.
No.
But we forgot to do it this episode, which is we're just getting started here. We're building out something massive. We talked about the IPO already, but we kind of have to get back to our roots, and we need to in every episode. I'm sorry that I have to remind you, but you need to teach me an Arabic word. So what do you got for your boy?
So the word today is a word I think is fun to say, and I hope that you think so too. Mustahil.
Mustahil.
Yeah. So it is fun to say, isn't it? Mustahil.
Oh, okay. Mustahil.
Okay.
What does it mean?
It just means impossible.
So what?
But it's used in conversation a lot. Like if you're talking and somebody tells you something that's surprising, you could just be like, Mustahil. No way.
No way.
Mustahil.
Okay. So, and this is, I've got a separate little list here of the words you're teaching me. And as everybody knows, we're going to do one for every episode so that by the time we do IPO this podcast, I will also have 190 or 390 Arabic words that I know very well.
Excellent.
Mustahil, and the one before, which means like no way or impossible.
It means no way. It means impossible. But yeah, it can be used in casual conversation quite a bit. And so that's a good word to use to throw out if somebody says something shocking to you. Mustahil.
Okay. Mustahil. Okay, cool. And do you remember your first word was like, Sorry, I got a separate list. It's not on my show notes, but I'm gonna have them here
Yeah,
ready to go.
عادي. My first word was almost the opposite of مستحيل, which is عادي, which is like, yeah, whatever, kind of, which means it's normal or it's just that, right? So
عادي and mustahil. Okay,
عادي.
2 words. Look, this is edifying for everybody, listeners and hosts. So that's great. Hanaa, thank you.
Thank you.